Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to introduce the project that I've been working on for the last little while, and in particular, I would like to show you a more advanced shop system. I've already done a video where I showed you how to do a quite simple shop. Now I'm going to show you a more complex one. So first of all, the project that I'm working on, as you can see, it's called Into the Hollow Earth. I'm going to be working on this for at least the next few videos, and it is another adaptation of a board game. I've already done a series where I adapted the game Mini Rogue. That was a fairly strict adaptation. I adapted all of the rules. The end result is, plays exactly the same as the original game. I think maybe there's one obscure rule that I didn't bother programming in, but basically it's a complete adaptation. But I changed the theme. The original game was fantasy, and I changed it to be science fiction. This project is an adaptation of the board game Source of the Nile, but it is a much looser adaptation. I'm doing it, well, I'll get into it in more detail as I go through the series, but I'm cutting out a lot of elements to make it a single player game with a sort of computer opponent, whereas the original game was multiplayer, and there are aspects of the game that I'm cutting out. Broadly, it's a game about exploration, and my version is just going to sort of tell you what you're exploring. You're exploring desert or whatever. It's going to abstract the system of exploration, whereas the original had a quite sort of detailed map and quite detailed rules for generating rivers and things like that. The original board game is from the 1970s. I've put a link to the Board Game Geek entry about it in the description of this video. And it's about the exploration of Africa by Europeans starting in the 1820s or so. And that's a slightly problematic theme nowadays, probably quite acceptable in the late 70s. But, some of the people who explored Africa had quite benign motives. Some of them were scientists. Some of them had, less benign aims. Others of them maybe meant well, but, had sort of unpleasant ideas about the people already living there. So hoping to avoid all that, I don't mind having games about controversial subjects at all, but I don't like the idea of having a game where you potentially can just be a villain and it's not referenced that you are being a villain. I don't even mind games where you play an evil character or you do evil things, but I think if I made a game like that, I would want it referenced that they are indeed evil things and not have the sort of ethical issues about that just ignored by the game. What I've done is, as I said, I called it Into the Hollow Earth, and it's sort of based on Victorian science fiction. The idea is that there's the Earth is hollow, of course, and that there are people living. There's a world on the inner surface of the sphere, and that's recently been discovered, and you're exploring it. That is a fringe theory that used to exist in the Victorian age. Some people thought that the Earth was hollow, and it's a fairly common subject for fiction as well. So let's go through what I've done so far. So we have £1,000. We have a checkbox list here of different types of people that we can bring with us. We can choose not to bring any of them, or we can choose to bring some or all of them even. In the original game, you have to choose who you are. You are one of these. You are a botanist, a doctor, an anthropologist, a geologist, a journalist, a missionary, or a zoologist, or an explorer. What I've done with this game is that you are an explorer, and you can choose to bring these other people as well, and they have particular effects in terms of getting you points and a few other things. So, for example, the botanist will get points for discovering plants. The zoologist, is very similar, except that they're looking for new animals. The missionary gets points when they sort of successfully preach to the locals. The doctor when they cure diseases, and so on and so on. And so the more of these people you choose, the more opportunities for points there are, but also it costs a certain amount of money out of your starting money. So let's say, just for fun, I'm going to bring a missionary and a doctor, and I click continue. We have to decide how we'll travel. Are you going to explore a river by canoe, or are you going to have an expedition where everyone's on horses, or are you going to go on foot? For this video, we're going to go on foot. And we have, and this is the main thing that I wanted to show you, we have a sort of shop system here where we have these people that we've decided. Obviously, you, the player character, is going on the expedition. I've decided to bring a doctor and a missionary, and then we have these people that we can hire. 3 types of people we can hire: scouts, guards, and bearers, and 3 sorts of resources: the muskets, gifts, which we use to give to the people that we meet to make it more likely that they'll be friendly, and rations, which will keep us alive. You can hunt as well, but of course rations are sort of an insurance if the hunting is no good. So this works as you might expect. There's a series of buttons that indicate that we can increase the number of, let's say, guards, for example. And once we have a bunch of a particular non-player character or a particular resource, we can also change our mind and say, well, actually, I want fewer of those now that I think about it. And as we go, as our numbers go up and down, the total cost of the expedition goes up and down. And of course, we're limited by the £800 that we have left after arranging for the doctor and the missionary to come with us, or we can just start again, and it starts again. You'll notice that when we change the state of the screen, we don't get that flicker because we're using the replace command, which is a way of getting around that problem of flickering. Whereas if we say we want to start again, we do get that brief fade out and fade in, because it's fine for I think it's fine for some transitions. But imagine if you had that every time you click that, it would look pretty bad. So this is basically a shop system, very similar to the one that I showed in a previous video, but there are some complications. There is a limit on scouts, a very strict limit. We can only have 1. So therefore, if we get 1, the plus button disappears, even though we've obviously got the money to hire another one. Gifts and rations go up by 5 rather than buying 1 at a time, because the numbers involved are quite high. So imagine if we got 30 gifts and 25 rations, and each of those 55 times we had to press plus 55 times. That would be not very fun. So it's simpler to just say, right, it goes up 5 at a time. And the third complication is to do with guards and muskets. When we started, we had 3 muskets. We can't go below 3 because the player character, the doctor, and the missionary sort of automatically have one. In the fiction of the game, of course, you could choose not to have them and save the £10, but I'm pretty sure that's the wrong choice. It's sort of a choice that is not a real choice. You should just buy muskets for everyone. And so I don't like choices that aren't real choices. It seems like busy work to just make people choose something when there's one correct choice, and there's not a sort of interesting, well, I could choose either of them, and that just makes the game different or something. No, there's one that is good and one that is bad. Well, you might as well just not have that as a choice. It seems to me, and so I've set it automatically. You have to have muskets for all of the sort of characters that are coming from Europe or England or wherever it is. The fiction of the game is quite sketchy so far because I've been concentrating on the mechanics. And similarly, when you hire guards, that will increase the number of muskets. So there'll always be at least a musket for every guard, and then one for, in this case, the extra 3 people that are coming. So we can buy more muskets because you can potentially get more guards as you travel. If you meet people, you might get extra guards, but you can't go below that limit. So if I go down to 11 because there's 8 guards and 3 Europeans, then that's the minimum. So those are the complications, and also, of course, every time we do this number will go up or down depending on what we've added or subtracted. So, and as a shop should, if we spend all our money, we don't get the option to spend any more because the expedition currently costs £800, and so of course we have to get rid of something if we want to. If we want to add something, we have to get rid of something else, of course, because we have a budget. So let's spend the rest of the video talking about how that works. I will say briefly that in a previous video I had a system where you chose a certain amount of money, and that was how much you were offering for a guide. Scouts in this are the same as guides. I changed it just because I didn't want guards and guides. They are pronounced too similarly, and I thought it might get, and spelt too similarly, so I thought it might get a bit confusing. And you, in the previous video, it had a drop-down menu. You chose an amount of money, and based on that, it told you that you got either no guide, a bad guide with various flaws, or a sort of run-of-the-mill guide or an exceptional guide that had some extra ability. I decided that I didn't want to have that at the moment. That was for this project, but I decided I didn't want it in this project because it seemed like the amount of money that we were talking about was only sort of £50-60 difference, and out of 1,000 at most, and out of £1,000 it seemed a bit fiddly. So I've just changed it back to how the original game works, which is that a guide costs £50. Well, actually, in the original game it's all dollars, but I changed it to pounds because it seemed more likely that the explorers would be English than American in most cases. But I've kept that code. I've taken it out of this project, but I've kept the code. So if you download the zip file from itch.io and you look in the Into the Hollow World folder, you'll have Into the Hollow Earth. You'll have Into the Hollow Earth, which is sort of the main program, and then you'll have that that mini system for bidding for a guide, which I might put back later. I might use it at a different point or something, but it's worth keeping the code anyway because it's something that might be of use for your own game. So, all right. So having said that, let's have a look at the program. So we'll start with the initialize page. So we have here the advantages and disadvantages, or A and D are the advantages and disadvantages of the guides, which currently aren't aren't used, and also I've changed the name of guides to scouts, but I do intend to use these character traits just further down the track, so we don't need to worry about that at the moment. We have $C, which is C for characters, which is all of the different types that you can choose to bring along with you: botanist, doctor, anthropologist, geologist, journalist, missionary, and zoologist. We have a little note that $CO is the total cost of the expedition. Now, we do have $M, which is money, and that's 1,000. It's equal to 1,000, which in the game is said to mean £1,000. So why have CO and M? Why not just have M and add and subtract to and from M as you buy or get rid of particular things? Well, the reason for that is because you can always opt out. I don't know if you noticed, but at the bottom of the screen, you can click to increase or decrease. But if you sort of really think it's not a good idea, you can just start all over again. And so if someone does choose to start all over again, I could have code that resets M if I was just using M, but it's much easier to just say, all right, well, if they want to reset it, we'll just reset CO to 0 and keep M as it is, and that's much easier than going through all of the things that you had and sort of fixing, arranging the money based on getting rid of all of those things. All right, so we have E is the type of expedition, which is foot-mounted or canoe. At the moment, we're only dealing with expeditions on foot. It's quite a complex game. It's quite realistic in terms of if you want to have canoes, you have to have enough bearers to paddle the canoes, and you have to have enough canoes to fit all of the expedition and all of its gear. And so there's a lot of sort of ratios that have to be kept. You can't just pick a lot of gifts and rations unless you've got the bearers to carry it and so on. And of course, all of those ratios are different depending on whether you're using an expedition up the river, or whether you're going by foot, or whether you're going by horse. So for now, we're only dealing with probably the simplest type, which is the expedition on foot. Then we have EN, which is an array with the names of the different NPCs or resources. So we have scouts, guards, bearers, muskets, gifts, and rations. It's actually all done as the singular version of that. So it's scout, guard, bearer, musket, gift, and ration, rather than muskets, gifts, rations, etc. Because it's easier to print the singular and then add an S on the end if it's plural, rather than sort of adding letters is easier than taking them away, essentially. That also means that I chose names whose plural is just that you add an S at the end, which is true of most English words, but not all of them. So I had to make sure that was true of all of these names. So we have EN, we have EC, which is the cost of each of them. So a scout costs 50, a guard 40, a bearer 10, a musket 10, a gift 2, and a ration 2. And then we have EX, which is how many of each of these things you have currently chosen to have. Already told you about M. O, actually, I should have deleted that, so that's my bad. That's no longer used. P stands for present, and it's which of the special characters, it's which of these guys are present, right? So if P3 is set to 1, then you've chosen to bring an anthropologist. And if P2 is set to 1, you've chosen to bring a doctor. And if P1 is set to 1, you've chosen to bring a botanist, and so on. So let's very briefly have a look at this. This is where you pick the special characters to bring with you, and it's a for loop within an HTML table. I won't go through the code of the HTML table because it's quite simple. We have a for loop that goes from 1 to c.length minus 1. In other words, the number of entries in this array. So if I get rid of one or add one, I don't have to change any other code. It'll just automatically update. This number will just be different and it'll do it correctly. And we print, for example, checkbox $P1 01, something like that, and then it'll print. In the next run through, it'll be the same, except it'll print P2 and so on and so on. So what does this mean? Sorry, there should be a quote mark there. So what does this mean? Well, checkbox means that it's a checkbox. It's one of those square boxes that if you click in it, it's ticked, and if you click in it again, it unticks. This is the variable that is changed by the checkbox, and we can have just normal variables. So it could have just $P, but you can also have slots in an array. And then this is the value if it's not checked, and the value when it is checked, which is just 0. It's 0 when it's not checked and 1 when it is checked. If I wanted to have anything checked at the start, I could put that, but I don't. I want to have everything not checked at the start. So we've gone through checkboxes before, so I won't go through that in sort of great detail. And then we just print $CZ next to the checkbox. We print the name of what you're choosing to bring or not bring. So anthropologist, doctor, or whatever. So the player will click the ones they want, and when they're ready, they'll press the button to continue to expense. Expense will... sorry, there's one more thing I should say about the P array, which I forgot. So as I say, if P3 is 1, then that means that a anthropologist is present, and P2 is 1, that means a doctor's present, and so on and so on. P0 keeps track of the total number of extra characters that are present. And it's useful to have that total, mainly because it determines how many muskets you buy at the start. So we set P0 to 0. We have a for loop that goes from 1 to c.length minus 1. And we reduce M by 100 times PZ. Now PZ is always going to be either 0 or 1. So in other words, 100 times 0 or 1 is either 0 or 100. In other words, it reduces your money by £100 if you've chosen to bring a given special character, and P0 is increased by 0 or 1. In other words, if that character, if you've chosen to have a particular special character, then we add 1 to the total number of special characters that you've brought. And once that's happened, we go to choice. This is very straightforward. It's just you must decide how you will travel. Include expedition choice. And expedition choice is just 3 buttons that say on foot, mounted, or by canoe. Notice that on foot has quotes around it, by canoe has quotes around it, mounted doesn't because it's a single word. I could have put quotes on it, but as long as I put both, quotes on either side, that would have been fine. But since there was no need to, I didn't. And each of them goes to the page initialize expedition. The only difference is that they set E to a different value. Now, E doesn't do anything at the moment because we've only coded the foot expedition, and in fact we've only coded part of the foot expedition stuff. So, but in the full game, it will matter. The value of E will matter because, for example, if you're going by canoe, then of course you have to have the option to buy canoes. Whereas if you're going on foot, you have to not have the option to buy canoes because they wouldn't be of any use to you. And similarly, if you're going on a mounted expedition, you need to have the option to buy either horses or camels. horses usually and camels if you're going through the desert. But anyway, now why, you might ask, why would you must decide how you'll travel and then have this as an include. Why not just have that text? Why not have the text that's in here instead of that include? Well, the reason is because we use this text twice. You can see there's two arrows going to it. When we're on the main page, when we're increasing or decreasing the resources that we have the option to just sort of give up and start again right down the bottom. And so we have that same text. And when you have text twice, it's usually better to have it as but not always, better to have it as a separate page and do it as an include, unless it's very short. You notice that some of where there should be arrows are missing. Like this one sends you to this one, but there's no little grey arrow. The reason for that is because it sends you by means of a button, and the Twine doesn't pick up that as a link. If I'd done it as a normal link, one of these, then it would pick it up, but buttons it doesn't pick it up, unfortunately. And similarly, this one sends you to initialize expedition, so there should be an arrow sort of going from there up to there, but again there isn't because it's a button. Okay, so we initialize the expedition. This just essentially sets everything to 0, remembering that EX is the number of each thing, like how many bearers and scouts, etc. The only exception is we set EX4 to $P0 plus 1, and that is muskets. EX4 is muskets, and so you have as many muskets as you have, remembering that P0 is the number of special characters, plus 1. So a musket for every special character, plus 1 for yourself. And yes, missionaries do carry muskets and use muskets. That's seems a bit jarring perhaps in modern times, but that's how the original game does it, and I think that's historically how it would have worked as well. And then it sets $CO, which is the current cost of the expedition, to be EX4, which is the muskets, times 10. That's a little bit of bad programming, actually. It shouldn't be times 10. It should be times where is it? It should be times EC4. And yes, EC4 is 10, and I don't think that's going to change. But theoretically, if I decided to change the cost of muskets, that wouldn't change because of how I've coded it. So, that's a mistake on my part. I will correct that in the version that I upload to itch.io. I'll also get rid of that reference to $O. But yeah, so obviously because you start with a certain number of muskets, the cost of the expedition is already non-zero. And then we go to outfit expedition, and that's where we're going to spend most of our time. We have a little note that says that $M doesn't change until the player sets out. It's CO going up and down instead, because of the way that you can just change your mind and start again, and that $E tells us the type of expedition, although at the moment it's only coded for foot expeditions. So we have a div ID equals quote WHOLE quote. This is something we use for the replace command to stop that flickering effect or that fade out, fade in effect. So I have dealt with that in previous videos, so I won't go into it in much detail. And it is the familiar HTML table. This is the best way to lay out, a lot of data. So the first thing we do is there's always a player character. So we have yourself, and we have these empty cells because the first cell is the cell where the plus button goes, and the next cell is the cell where the number goes of how much stuff you've got. So that's why this one's in the third cell across. It looks a bit weird if they were in one of the first two. Then, if P0 is over 0, in other words, if you have chosen any special characters, we have a for loop which goes from 1 to c.length, and if the particular slot of P is equal to 1, then we do something similar to this, except that instead of saying yourself, we're printing $CZ, so doctor, anthropologist, or whatever it may be. So now we have the main, I suppose the main bit of the code. It takes up sort of the bulk of the code. And this is printing the current state of the resources that you've chosen. So we have first of all, we're dealing with whether we're going to have a minus button. And so we have a fairly complicated bit of code here. If Z is not equal to 4, that's what exclamation mark equals means. If $Z is not equal to 4 and EXZ is over 0, or if Z is equal to 4 and EX4 is over P0 plus 1 plus EX2. Now, what does that mean? Well, if Z is not equal to 4 and EXZ is over 0, well, the fourth slot is the number of muskets. So if we're not dealing with muskets, we just look at $EX, and if we have any of the particular resource that we're talking about, then all of this code is activated to give us a minus button. Because of course, if you've got more than one of anything, the normal state of affairs is that if you've got more than one of anything, you can get rid of them. But there's a special rule for muskets. For muskets, if Z equals 4, we only have the option to get rid of the muskets if the EX4, the number of muskets, is greater than $P0 plus 1 plus EX2. Now, what does that mean? Well, $P0 is the number of special characters, the missionaries and so on, missionaries and doctors and anthropologists, plus 1 for you, the player character, and then $EX2 is the number of guards. So we can only get rid of muskets if every guard and every European has one. And so if that's the case, if either of those things is the case, then we enact this code here. And this is one of those ones where we have to store all the code in a variable and then write it, and at the end print the variable. So the code says button minus, which just means a button whose text is the minus character and which is not going anywhere. It doesn't have a destination, doesn't send you to another page. Then we have this code. If Z is less than 5, then do this, else do this. So what's the difference? Well, if Z is less than 5, then we're not talking about gifts and rations. And gifts and rations are special in that you buy them or unload them 5 at a time. So normal, the non-player characters you hire 1 at a time, and muskets you buy or get rid of 1 at a time. So that's this code, and then this code is for gifts and rations, which are done 5 at a time. So the difference is we will add into the $W variable set $EXZ minus minus, in other words, reduce it by 1, whereas in this one we say set EXZ equals EXZ minus 5. So we're reducing it by 5 at a time instead of 1 at a time. And similarly, or correspondingly, we say we set CO equals CO minus ECZ, or set CO equals CO minus ECZ times 5. Because we're losing 5 of them, of course that's going to reduce our expenses by the cost of 5 of those things. Then we have replace, starting from hashtag whole, which of course is basically at the top of the page, so we're replacing everything. Include outfit expedition, in other words, go to the page that we're on now, and then /replace. And as I've said before, that's our way of, as it were, tricking the program into not doing that fade out and fade in. And then we have, of course, the /button to indicate that that's the end of the code to do with the button, and then we print all of that at once. I've gone into the reasons why we do that, but broadly it's because we would have a problem if we just printed EXZ. It wouldn't give us the results we want. I've talked about that in a previous video. So that's the button to go to minus. Then we have the column where we print the numbers, and we've got a set width for that, and we align it to the right because numbers generally look better if they're aligned to the right. And because the scout is you can only have 0 or 1, it seemed to me to say no scout sort of seemed better than 0 scouts. So that's why I've got this special code which says if Z equals 1 and EX1 is equal to 0, we say no, as in the text NO. Otherwise, we print the number that's in that slot of EX, in other words, how many of the resource we have. The next slot is we print the name. Basically, we print the name of the resource or non-player character. So we will say bearer, but remember that there's a problem with plurals. We don't say one bearers, we say one bearer. So we have to have if EXZ is equal to 1 or Z equals 1. In other words, if we're dealing with scouts, because if we have 0 scouts, we don't say 0 scouts, we say no scout. So if EXZ is equal to 1 or Z equals 1, then we print the name of that the thing that we're dealing with. Otherwise, we print the name of the thing we're dealing with plus S to make it a plural. And so that's why I had to print. That's why I had to choose names and make sure that they were all turned into a plural by adding S at the end rather than ES or something else. I mean, yes, you could code it and have exceptions to add ES or whatever, but just makes it a bit easier to just have everything pluralized by with S. Then we have the cost, and again, it's if Z is less than 5, print the cost pounds each. Otherwise, if Z is not less than 5, and we're dealing with the things that are bought 5 at a time, print 5 times the cost pounds for 5. So what we've printed so far, just to summarise, we've printed, if necessary, we've printed the special characters and the yourself to indicate that the player character is coming. We've printed a button to reduce the number that we have of a particular thing. Then we've printed the name of the particular thing, the number of the particular thing that we have, the name of the particular thing with an S at the end if we need to, then the cost of the particular thing. Now we're getting to printing the button to increase the number of particular things, so the equivalent of the minus button. All right, so if Z is equal to 1, in other words, if we're dealing with scouts, and EXZ is equal to 1, I could have put EX1 is equal to 1 there. That probably would have been better coding, actually. I mean, it's the same thing, but anyway, I'll try and fix it in the version that I upload. But either way, if we're dealing with scouts and we've already got a scout, then nothing happens because you can't have more than one scout, so we're not going to print a plus button. Otherwise, we've got quite a complicated bit of code which goes all the way down to here. So all of this code is dealing with whether we want to print a plus button and with actually printing it if we do need to do that. So first of all, we're going to set a value for the temporary variable y. And because there's a few different things that are treated differently, this is why we have this intermediate step. So y is going to be 0 if we're hiring another guard and there is no spare musket. It's going to be 1 if we're hiring another guard and there is a spare musket. It's going to be 2 if we're buying gifts or rations because they're bought 5 at a time. And it's going to be 3 if we're hiring bearers or buying muskets. In other words, if it's not any of these special cases. So that's what this code up here does. If z is equal to 2, in other words, if we're dealing with, let's look at EN, if we're dealing with guards, then if, this basically means if we have spare muskets. If the number of muskets is greater than the number of special characters plus 1 plus the current number of guards, then we set y equals 1 because that's what we've listed down here. Otherwise, we set y equals 0. So that code only is triggered if z is equal to 2. So in other words, if z is equal to 2, if we're dealing with guards, then we're going to set z to either 0 or 1, depending on whether there are spare muskets. Else, if z is over 4, then we set y equal to 2, because it's one of those things. And otherwise, if none of those things apply, we set, sorry, I kept saying set z. We set y equal to 2, and if none of those things apply, we set y equal to 3. And we set x equal to ECZ, in other words, the cost of the thing that we're currently looking at. But if y equals 0, we're hiring another guard and there's no spare musket, well, we have to add EC4, i.e. the cost of a musket. That is, if we're hiring another guard and there's no spare muskets, we also have to buy a musket, so that increases the cost. And if y equals 2, if it's gifts or rations, then we have to multiply the cost by 5 because we're dealing with 5 at a time. Then we look at $CO, the current cost of the expedition, plus X, the cost of increasing the resource that we're talking about. And if that is less than or equal to M, then we can afford to increase this particular stat. And so we have another one of these cases where we are going to have a very long bit of text, which is code, and then we're going to print that code. So we set W equal to this code, which is button plus. In other words, it's just a button with a plus sign on it. We set cost equals cost plus X. We've determined the cost. If Y equals 2, in other words, if we're buying gifts or rations, then we have to set EXZ equal to itself plus 5. Otherwise, we have to set EXZ plus plus. In other words, we increase it by 5 if it's a thing that's bought in 5s, and we increase it by 1 otherwise. If Y equals 0, in other words, we're hiring a guard and there's no spare musket, then we have to have code that says also increase the number of muskets by 1. And then we have the same thing as before, the replace, the include, the slash replace, the slash button, and print W. That's all identical to the minus button. And then we're just closing off ifs and TDs and so on, and fors, and the table. And then we have finally just a bit of text that says the current cost is CO pounds, and you have M pounds to outfit your expedition. And then we have another bit of code which is allowing us to start again. And then we have this slash div, which is just because of this. We needed to put this in so we can do the replaces, and that's just closing off the div. Everything's considered to be in a giant paragraph for the purposes of replace. So that is a more slightly complicated shop. There are various exceptions. You can't buy, if you buy this, you have to buy that. You can only buy one of, hire. I mean, you're not buying, in this fiction of the game, you're not buying slaves, you're hiring bearers and hiring a scout and so on. You can't hire more than one of the scout. That's one complication. There's the complication to do with guards and muskets, and there's the fact that some things are bought 5 at a time. So that is an example of a more complicated shop system. So I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.